Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Advertising, Design, and the Archive, Uncovering New Art Histories, which is sponsored by the Block Museum at Northwestern. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Ready users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along with the right-hand side, you may see a Q&A panel. To open that up, just click the little arrow pointing at the Q&A, and that will expand the panel for you. You likely don't see the chat panel. If you move your mouse over your screen, and it should pull up a series of buttons along the bottom. The third in from the right, the one that's kind of like a dialogue cloud there, will open up the chat for you if it's turned blue. So please use the Q&A panel to submit questions to our speakers. We'll hold those until the end and get to as many as we have time for. The chat panel is to message me directly about any technical issues that you may be having. So if you're having trouble with your sound or seeing anything, please let me know and I will troubleshoot that with you privately. Today and always, we're using the hashtag ACRLChoiceWebinars during the presentation. So if you've got another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I will turn the presentation over to Corinne.
My colleague and I will be sharing a behind-the-scenes look at the project Up is Down, which was an exhibition at the Block Museum of Art in 2018. Just to introduce ourselves, I am Corinne Granof. I'm the academic curator at the Block Museum at Northwestern University and was a co-curator for the project Up is Down with my colleague.
I'm Amy Beste. I'm Director of Public Programs at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I was one of the co-curators on this show.
Up is Down was part of a citywide initiative called Art Design Chicago, which was developed and supported by the Terra Foundation for American Art, and it was the umbrella for dozens of projects that took place throughout the city. And our project looked specifically at the work of Morton and Millie Goldsholl, who were artists, designers, filmmakers based in Chicago, and we'll introduce them and their work a little more in the next few minutes. But just to give you an overview, one aspect we wanted to highlight for this presentation was the unique way that the exhibition used archival sources as really the foundation for an art exhibition. And this was a unique case for the Block Museum. We tend to, of course, use archives for research and certainly include archival materials in art exhibitions. But this was the first art exhibition that was truly built out of archival material. So there were several different aspects and components to the project. And just to give you an overview, the exhibition was on view here last fall from September to December of 2018. And on the left, you see a screenshot from our website showing some related events. So there were a number of talks and screenings that took place. And on the right is the cover of the book that we produced with the exhibition, which is now distributed by Northwestern University Press. So just to expand a little bit, the web page, what you see on our web page, is one listing from, again, numerous gallery talks and lectures that expanded on exhibition content. And a really important part of that, of course, was screenings, because this exhibition was really about film, but we weren't able to include as many films as we would have liked in the exhibition in the gallery. So this allowed for more time-based media. The book on the right, of course, extended the life of the exhibition, and it was really the first in-depth publication about the Goldsholl's work. So these were the three main pillars of the project: the exhibition, the programs, the book, all supported by the Terra Foundation for American Art. And now again, we're gonna focus on how this was built out of archives.
So I think the first question is, who were the Goldsholls and what was Goldsholl Design Associates? So Goldsholl Design Associates, while relatively unknown today, was a leading national design firm at mid-century. The firm worked at the cross-section of art, design, film, advertising, and television. At the time, it was compared to some of the most celebrated design firms of the day. So if you know Saul Bass, it was compared to Saul Bass's studio, as well as the Eames office, and had a national impact on design and designers. It was founded by Morton and Millie Goldsholl, and they're in this picture, they're at the very left. That's Morton at the very left, and Millie is standing next to him. And it really reflected their artistic vision and sensibility. And this picture is a picture of the firm in 1963. The firm was founded by Morton and Millie in 1954. And if you can see, the firm attracted a notably diverse set of associates at the time. And it also promoted women to really high levels within the firm itself. So Millie, of course, was one of the co-founders of the firm and oversaw the film division. And Susan Jackson Kigg eventually was promoted to vice president of the firm, and she's standing there towards the middle. So while the name of the firm might not be super familiar to you, I think that you are likely familiar with a lot of their work, since a lot of the things that they designed impacted your everyday life. So for example, you can see on the upper right, the Motorola logo, which was designed in 1955 and is still in use today. On the lower right, you can see the 7-Up logo, which is still very clearly 7-Up. This was designed in 1975. So Goldsholl Design Associates really established their reputation for their inventive approaches to materials and design problems. And the firm took on everything. Like I said, they really devoted themselves to many of the sort of ephemera that surrounds us in our everyday life. So from print advertising to packaging, to logos and trademarks, to industrial products and processes. And it was also a pioneer in what was the then nascent field of corporate identity design, which we now think of as branding. So Morton and Millie Goldsholl and many of the firm's associates were deeply inspired by the German Bauhaus and the school's philosophy of merging art and industry. And they had been introduced to these ideas through the artist and designer Laszlo Moholy-Nagy while attending his School of Design in Chicago. Moholy-Nagy was a central figure in the German Bauhaus and had founded the Chicago School as a kind of American version in 1937. The Goldsholls took the concepts and approaches that they had learned at the School of Design and brought them into mid-century. And this slide is a really nice example of that. In this slide, you can see the Good Design logo. This is a logo that Morton Goldsholl designed for a series of exhibitions of household goods and furniture that took place at the Museum of Modern Art in the 1950s. There was also a related exhibition at Chicago's Merchandise Mart. And this Good Design logo was on the walls and was also used as hang tags for materials sold associated with this exhibition. So this design is really bold and straightforward with sans serif lettering, right justification. It's all set within the geometry of the circle. It's emblematic of the Bauhaus emphasis on unadorned yet graphic approach to print design. So the firm also made a name for itself through its work in media. And we've got a couple of clips to show you. So there'll be a slight pause, but we'll show you this clip and then we'll talk a little bit more about Okay, we're ready to move back to the slide. So the firm also made, like I said, it made a name for itself through its work in media. It was one of the very few design firms in the country at the time to move into film and television, and it really established itself as a pioneer in this arena. Morton Goldsholl saw film as an extension of the work the firm was doing in design, and it was a way to apply some of the avant-garde ideas he had been exposed to at the School of Design. So in the clip we just saw, this was a clip from a short film that the firm had made to help introduce a new packaging line and set of trademarks and symbols for Kimberly-Clark's Kleenex tissue. This was part of a much larger project, which included the new symbol, the package, as well as a new packing technique, which fit more tissues into each box. And the Goldshulls were involved in every aspect of that design process. The film employs really inventive techniques like you saw, the stop motion animation of the flower petals and the flowers, mixing animation and live action. So that's Morton Goldsholl that you see sneezing in the background, as well as hand scratching onto film stock. So those little dots are actually, someone had hand scratched that into the very film emulsion to get that look. So this playful approach to design ideas, you know, having the petals turn into Kleenex's new symbol, that's really emblematic of the Goldsholl approach to design. And this work was really deliberately produced to contrast with the more straightforward demonstrational commercials that dominated the era.
So some of their, they also worked in film in different ways. What you just saw was an example of their commercial work, but Up is Down was one of the independent works that Millie produced with help from people who are working in the Goldsholl Studio. And it was a 1969 kind of educational experimental film that was mostly animation, and you see two stills from the film here on the screen. The title Up is Down, and then one of the other moments in the film where you see a very simple kind of animation style. But then it also included things like a flash frame montage sequence that included stills from local or contemporary news events. And but this was Millie's project, and she was the director of the firm. It was really highly acclaimed. It won a lot of awards and is a really kind of sweet and inspirational film about a boy, as you see, who walks on his hands. He is marginalized and a social outcast because of the way he walks and how he sees the world differently from everybody else. And as you've already probably noted, we've chosen this as the exhibition title because it also kind of spoke to how Morton and Millie turned the world of advertising and design on their heads. So this is an example of one of the independent works that Millie did. And so that was basically an introduction to who the Goldshulls were. And at this moment, we were going to shift and talk a little bit about our approach as curators. And obviously, there are many ways to approach a topic like this or turn this kind of material into an exhibition. But we're going to just talk about the three major themes and stories we tried to develop and kept in mind as we were researching this project. So the major components were telling the story about film, aiming to explore and contextualize the Goldshulls' work in film and also in art and design, and then also to ground their work in Chicago, because their work really came out of the environment of Chicago, and we were trying to understand how it developed here and how this environment responded to their work. So, and also it was part of the umbrella theme of Art Design Chicago. So that was one aspect of the project as well. And in piecing together the story, we relied on a few different types of archives. So we're going to introduce that right now.
So first, first, just to talk a little bit about the first story, film. So as most archival projects start, we used what we knew to find new leads and stories. And in this case, we were aware of a number of the firm's really big projects. For example, this film, Faces and Fortunes, which is pictured in this slide, produced in 1959. So Faces and Fortunes was another film that Goldsholl Design Associates produced for Kimberly-Clark. But in this case, rather than advertising a particular product, it advertised the way Kimberly-Clark's products could be used as a tool to help branding and with identifying companies. So it was really part of Goldsholl Design Associates' efforts to establish itself as a pioneer and as leaders in this nascent field of corporate identity. So in this case, here the red dot that you see in both the eye and on this door frame is a through line throughout the film and really serve as this kind of identifying symbol, really showing how this can be done. So this film had been given to the Chicago Film Archives in 2006 by Millie Goldsholl, and I had seen it there. This is Amy. I had seen it there and had curated it into a couple of screenings. I'd also written about it in a book titled Chicago Makes Modern, which was edited by Jacqueline Bass and Mary Jane Jacob. And I also wrote about it in my dissertation. And because of this, the Chicago Film Archives was able to make a successful case for its preservation and restoration in 2013 by applying for and receiving a grant from the National Film Preservation Foundation. So we worked really closely with the Chicago Film Archives because they had been the repository, the very earliest repository for this Goldsholl collection after having received this initial gift from Millie Goldsholl. And they were incredibly generous with their time and materials. So at the same time that we started our project, the Chicago Film Archives also received another group of films from the Goldsholl family. And they also received a grant from the Council on Library and Information Resources, which was titled or geared towards digitizing hidden special collections and archives. It was supported by the Mellon Foundation, and they used this to finish the processing and cataloging of their Morton and Millie collection. So while this was happening, they allowed us to review material like almost virtually at the same time that they were processing it. And because of this very close relationship that we were able to develop, they also ended up flagging material for us to review, both for our research and also for potential inclusion in the show itself. So while they were doing this, then we were also sharing research that we were coming across at the same time. So we were trying to establish a really mutually supportive relationship, and it really strengthened, I think, the overall expertise on both sides and really helped both partners and strengthened our overall outcomes. So the image that you see on the right is an image of a spreadsheet from the catalog from the Morton Millie collection, and then the image on the left is actually the vault for the Chicago Film Archives. So we were really pleased to be able to develop this kind of working relationship with the CFA, and I think it became, since it was so mutually supportive, it really helped us develop both a better exhibition, kind of identify the most important materials that we wanted to show for our exhibition, but it also helped to really strengthen their catalog as well. So some of the things that we came across in our research were things like this. They were things that were just experimental reels. So we have a small clip that we can pull up here, and I'll just talk over it as it gets pulled up. But this clip is a clip from a reel called the Nomia Experiments. And this is titled after one of the associates, Fred Nomia, who worked on this reel with Morton and Millie. And this reel included a range of techniques that its designers would refine over the years. It included stop motion animation, like what you just saw. It included, again, scratch-on film techniques. It included much more experimental light techniques. And it often incorporated kind of experiments that could potentially be geared towards the commercial clients that the Goldshulls had already developed. So in this case, the toothpicks form into a house and then into a sun. The sun shoots its rays onto the roof of the house, which are deflected by this particular brand of paint, Morton Senior paints. So you can see that the Goldshulls, or we could see in our research, the Goldshulls were really thinking holistically about their design, and we could identify specific objects that would relay the story later in the exhibition.
Also part of the Chicago Film Archives and the gift from Millie and Morton and Millie Goldsholl were a number of home movies. And although this material wasn't included in the exhibition, it helped us kind of situate them and understand their life and their work better than we would have. Millie Goldsholl was someone who very often had a camera in her hand and was filming things like her own children, her family travels, things like art events that she attended. So there was a lot of material to cull through. The image that you see on the left is Millie herself, and this was a film that Morton must have made when they both attended a workshop at a progressive school in Aspen in the summer of 1949, and Millie was here doing a kind of interpretive dance. So this was the kind of the material that we had access to. On the right is a still from a film that Millie made when she went to Washington, D.C. in 1969 to participate in the moratorium on the Vietnam War. She traveled there with her daughter, so she took a lot of footage. She filmed a lot while she was there. And this too kind of gave us a little bit of insight into her. I mean, she was known as an activist and an advocate for civil rights. Her friends and her family affectionately referred to her as Lefty. So these kinds of films were wonderful research that were part of the CFA archives, and it was certainly a big commitment of time to, because it's time-based media, just to watch a lot of these materials, but it paid off very handsomely. So in the next slide, we have another clip here. Another group of films in the Chicago Film Archives. Just wait till the clip is loaded. A group of films in the Chicago Film Archives called Lens Distortion. And you're seeing one play here. Light, it really focuses on the movement of light, the kinetic quality of light, and as you see kind of the bending or movement of light, you'll also see logos, company logos passing through. So in the Goldsholl Studio, there was a lot of experimentation with all kinds of equipment or using, we can go back to the other slide now, using things like Christmas lights to see how colored light bends or moves and what kinds of effects they could create, just experimenting in the studio. So some of these objects did make it into the exhibition. The work on the right is a still from one of these lens distortion films, and it's one where they were really just kind of playing around with light and color and movement. The one on the left, you see that they were also trying to see its potential for commercial application. So the Motorola logo kind of bends and floats on the screen and appears as kind of transparent color. So they were trying to kind of present what they could do to clients in terms of making film very interesting as a promotional strategy.
So in addition to working with the Chicago Film Archives, we also look to several other archives, especially for the firm's television commercials. If anyone here works with television commercials, you know that they are notoriously difficult to track down. Works produced for television or commercials produced for television were often considered totally ephemeral. They weren't carefully archived or preserved by either clients or makers. So we turned to two different archives known for their collections of television commercials, the Paley Center for Media in Los Angeles and New York, and the UCLA Film and Television Archive. So at Paley, which we'll focus on here, we met an amazing archivist, Martin Gustonian, who showed us a number of different resources for finding television commercials. For example, this included locating television commercials on awards reels, so really tracking down different awards and then backtracking through various magazines to find out, or journals to find out who had won that year. Another technique would be actually locating recordings of television programs that included local commercials as recorded as part of them. All of this requires an incredibly deep knowledge of television history as well as industry practices, something that people who are involved with archiving television commercials really have. So this is a research photograph on the right of our time at Paley, looking at commercials. This is a shot from the commercial Quasar Ultimate TV. It was produced for Quasar Television, which was a subsidiary of Motorola in 1978. It features a stop animation sequence of the hardware behind the TV set, and it uses Goldsholl Design Associates' patented modulens technology, which was this technique that filtered photographic imagery into square pixels. While the effect looks digital, the device was actually a grid of miniature lenses. So like I said, we also work closely with UCLA Film and Television Archive and the archivist Mark Quigley. He also shared with us a number of different techniques for looking at and finding commercials. So the image on the right here is one of the commercials that we located in this archive. This is from the firm's Beautiful Life commercial from Revlon in 1977. And we have a clip from this as well, which can load, so we can take a look at how it's working. So this clip also uses the modulens technology. So you can see the image turning into these square pixels, resolving into a clear photographic image, and then becoming kind of pixelated again. And what's interesting about this is that this technique really reflects the same kind of material that the commercial would have been originally aired on. So this would have been shown on a CRT television monitor, which is made up of similar kinds of pixels. So our mutual interest, the archivists and Corinne and I's mutual interest in these commercials, our interest in including them in this exhibition, our interest in thinking about them within the whole scope of the Goldsholl's career and as really taking them seriously as objects. I think that this really helped to establish and strengthen our relationship with these archivists. And this was something that we were able to draw upon later to help us organize these loans. For example, Paley is not normally a lending organization for exhibitions, but we were able to get the Quasar Ultimate TV commercial for our exhibition. Similarly, UCLA does not always loan, but we were able to build on our relationship for this particular exhibition. So in addition to film, as Corinne noted earlier on, we also wanted to pay attention to the Goldsholl's contributions to design and art making in our exhibition. So in terms of looking at their work in design and art, we also turn to various archives and special collections to track down this material. So we were aware, like as with their work in film, we were aware of some of their bigger projects. And this was largely because they have been published in these national journals and design magazines like Print, like Communication Arts, like Idea, and others. So here, the image that you see here is a cover that Morton Goldsholl designed for Print magazine in 1958. This was one of the leading design magazines at the time. And it doubles as a Kimberly-Clark advertisement for their Texoprint paper. That's the back cover that you see there. The Goldsholl's work was regularly featured in these national magazines. They were the subjects of numerous articles and callouts. They also wrote and contributed to a number of these articles, which really gave us some insight into the circles they traveled in, how their designs were received, as well as it gave us some specific objects to go after or try to find.
So one of the sources, one of the great resources for us in Chicago was the University of Chicago, University of Illinois at Chicago Archives, their Special Collections Library, which has a number of important collections of design materials that come out of Chicago. For example, the Container Corporation of America, the 27 Designers Group, which was based in Chicago, and the Society of Typographic Arts. So the Morton and Millie, or the Morton Goldsholl collection is housed there as well. And we made a number of trips to the archives to find things like you see on the screen, the 7-Up bottle, and also some designs for 7-Up packaging that were implemented in the mid-70s. With the 7-Up campaign was part of the See the Light campaign, and this distinctive logo with the dots was part of that. So this is something that we were able to find at University of Illinois at Chicago. What was in the collection was not, it was not always clear what the status was within their work or how well it represented their career or their successes. So these were questions that we were constantly having to revisit and ask ourselves and consult with the family or with other design scholars on just how representative was the material, how do we sort it out and make it meaningful within the context of an exhibition, and what kinds of materials could be used to tell these stories. So the 7-Up campaign was clearly going to be part of the story because it was a very important campaign for 7-Up and also really representative of the Goldsholl's work. And we would find things like collections of slides. These were actually from the archive of Thomas Miller, who, as Amy pointed out earlier, he was one of the employees of the Goldsholl firm. He was an employee for 35 years, so associated with the firm for a long time. And we were very grateful that he had the foresight to kind of save bits and pieces from the studio that might otherwise have not been saved. And what you see on the screen now is a series of 22 slides that were in the Miller archive. And these really were important, first of all, in helping round out our understanding of the firm's work. We haven't really touched on it yet, but so much of what they were doing was around the exploration of light, as we saw a little bit in the lens distortion films. So these were kind of concrete examples of some of the experiments with light that they had done in the firm. They called these harmonograms and started working on them around 1950. And what they would do is create these pendulums with light that then they would fix with photography. And they appear like these woven strands of light, sometimes with color that they create by using filters. But what these were evidence really also of is how they played around in the studio with motion, with light, with lenses, with cameras, and creating different effects, which were in part kind of pure experimentation, but then also sometimes had application to their commercial work. So on the right is an ad that the Goldsholl Studio produced in 1957. It was for a kind of paper that Kimberly-Clark was producing called Texoprint. And they used the harmonogram forms, as you see in the background, these kind of lights or luminous strands of light that emanate in the background, kind of represent this merging of art, of science, and kind of convey the forward-looking thinking of the product. And it also just is a beautiful and super eye-catching ad that would have appeared in print magazine in 1957.
So in addition to turning to University of Illinois at Chicago for their collections, including the really personal Thomas Miller collection, we also worked really closely with the Goldsholl family, and of course dug into their family archive. So this is an image here of Morton and Millie Goldsholl taken from a kind of family scrapbook. And this image is from 1939, and you can see the little heart that Morton drew on his chest for his wife. So the kinds of things that we found in this archive are really different than the other materials that we came across, which speak more clearly to their professional careers, are much more clearly evidence to the kind of processes behind their work as well as their work itself. And so this archive was much more focused on memorabilia and memories in general. It really documented special awards, honors, moments, and there were occasionally some kind of treasures in there. From a research perspective, this archive was invaluable. It really enriched our understanding of what was important to the associates and the Goldsholls themselves, also gave us a better understanding of their particular working environment. So for example, the photograph on the left is a photograph of Millie and Morton with Martin Luther King Sr. at the Atlanta Film Festival in 1968, where Millie's film Up is Down won the Goldson Dove Award for contributing to world peace. The film had been dedicated to Martin Luther King Jr. and really reflected the Goldsholl's own investment and participation in civil rights issues. Whereas the photograph on the right is a photograph of the firm's office space. This had been designed by Millie Goldsholl. It also features Susan Jackson Kaig, who I mentioned earlier, would eventually become the vice president of the firm. So it really shows how the associates were working in this physical space. It shows how the Goldsholls wanted to project themselves and the way they worked, and gave us a much better sense of the way those things, and the kind of the role that those things played in their working environment.
One of the really wonderful finds that we came across in the Goldsholl Family Archive was a series of slides. Morton called these light paintings. You see just a grouping of them here. And we had read about these in one of Morton's memoirs, or some manuscript that he typed up with memories of his work. We didn't expect that we would find them, but we were thrilled to run across them. So just to show you, these are, this is how a little bit akin to how we projected it in the exhibition, but they're 2 by 2 inch slides that have objects collaged between them. So you can see clearly in this one a leaf and seeds and film gel, and on the right some cotton. And they were called light paintings because they were meant to be projected with light passing through them. They were shown once, I believe, in Morton's lifetime, and then we were thrilled to be able to present them as part of the exhibition. So this was a very happy archive find. The third kind of major theme that we wanted to convey in the exhibition was Chicago and its role both in fostering the Goldsholl Studio and how they were received here. So one of the sub-stories that we mentioned earlier
is that the Goldshall and many members of their firm had studied at the School of Design. The ideas and approaches that they encountered there really played a strong role in the firm's work. It wended its way throughout the Goldshall's career. You can see examples of the inspiration that they drove from the School of Design throughout many of their projects. So this image that you see here is an image of Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who founded the School of Design in 1937. On the right, you see his book, Vision in Motion, which was published in 1947 after he had passed away. This book really helped introduce his ideas about design and design education to a broad public, and in fact became one of the leading kind of textbooks on design for most of the last century. This book also included images of works produced by both Millie and Morton during their time at the school. So we were really interested in trying to find objects and materials that conveyed this story, that really connected Morton and Millie Goldshall to the School of Design, to really underscore the importance of the school and to really concretely exemplify its role in their life and in Goldshall Design Associates. So one of the things that we did was look for publications that would help communicate the Goldshall's relationship to the school. So for example, this book, Rebuilding Our Communities, which was written by Walter Gropius and based on a talk that he had held in Chicago. This was published by Paul Theobald Press, a very important press in Chicago that was very closely connected to Laszlo Moholy-Nagy's Bauhaus School of Design. And in fact, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy had edited a book series within it. This was part of the book series. The book was designed by Morton and Millie Goldshall, and it's really emblematic of these Bauhaus ideas and their Chicago application. So just even in the design itself, you get these very strong graphic sensibility. You get this juxtaposition between this kind of aerial new city plan with an image of a Victorian house that's kind of ripped and torn in the back. You get these transparent and overlapping planes that recall architecture or mechanical drawing class exercises, all of it really conveying this kind of Bauhaus sensibility.
So one of the reasons too that of course the Goldshalls flourished here was Chicago being the home of so many major corporations and also other corporations based not in Chicago but in the Midwest. So we already touched on Kimberly-Clark, which was based in Wisconsin, and Amy and I heard a number of stories of the Goldshalls driving to Wisconsin to work with Kimberly-Clark. But Motorola, of course, a huge corporation based in Chicago, was one that the Goldshalls worked with, and that relationship started in the mid-50s when Morton designed the new logo for Motorola, the Batwing M design that's still used pretty much today, that you see in the center of the slide. But they also designed this showroom for the Merchandise Mart in 1955. And this was something, we had seen a photograph of it in a book that Morton had published, but this is where we were reaching out to the archive of Motorola to try to get more information about the project. So Motorola was definitely one of the archives that we worked with, and what they were able to provide was mostly things like press releases. So there wasn't a lot of archival information or materials that were retained, but that kind of text was very helpful in confirming what we understood, for example, this project to be. So this futuristic showroom that they designed for the Merchandise Mart was had all this like circuit board and a sky, and it projected futurism and forward thinking of the company, very high tech. So that was one archive that we worked with. We also worked with Vienna Beef, which is based here in Chicago too. Morton designed this package for hot dogs for Vienna Beef, but this was we met with the people at Vienna Beef. Again, there wasn't a lot that was in the archive or retained, but in this case, there were several people who were still at the company who knew Mort, who worked with him, who respected him, and had very high regard for him. So we were able to hear a lot of stories about Morton's role and how he helped work on branding for the company. For example, the logo for Vienna Beef used to be just the V, and Morton added the fork and the hot dog. He also kind of came up with the title Vienna Beef. It was called Vienna Sausage previously. So there were really interesting stories about how this, how his branding or his ideas had a really productive effect for the company.
He also wanted to convey the sort of milieu in which Morton and Millie Goldsholl and Goldsholl Design Associates came out of. At the time, Chicago was known for being the Hollywood of industrial and educational film and its associated industries, with a large number of producers of this kind of material. And we wanted to look for material that really helped to highlight that story. So we have a clip here of the opening sequence from the World Series of Golf, a 1967 television program that was produced by Chicago-based producer Walter Schwimmer, who pioneered a number of sports television shows and formats, including Championship Bowling and the World Series of Golf. This was proved to be an incredibly difficult clip to find. This kind of speaks to what I've been talking about earlier in terms of difficulty finding commercials. A lot of things that were broadcast live on television were not archived at all. They were just screened unless someone had recorded them. So we ended up using this clip from a different film that the Goldsholls had produced for Kodak, in which they incorporated the same material into it. And so I think part of what we ran into here is that even though we were in Chicago, and Chicago was this incredible industry from which the Goldsholls emerged, in which they really wanted to participate, we couldn't even track down some of this very important material that speaks to the work in the city itself.
So for the last part of our presentation, we just wanted to take you through the exhibition and share with you how some of these archival materials appeared in space, and you know, and sort of share some of our ideas about storytelling in an exhibition through archival objects. So things we were thinking about along the way were, again, how do you make these kind of archival materials into a compelling exhibition and a cohesive story? We thought a lot about how much to include, especially with the time-based media. And another question too that came up a lot was the idea of facsimiles and how do we incorporate those effectively into the exhibition.
So throughout the exhibition, as we mentioned before, we really wanted to highlight motion pictures or projected work, their light works, with the works that they did in print and other arenas. So the image that you see here is a room in which we had projected the digitized light paintings that Morton had made in the 1940s. So you see them here projected. And then they're juxtaposed against some of the logos that Goldsholl Design Associates produced throughout the time of the firm, as well as there's a small case, you can't see what's in it, but within that case is a bunch of printed material from a number of different archives, including the University of Illinois, Chicago. In this vignette, you see all of the work that we collected together to demonstrate the kind of breadth of projects that they did around 7-Up. So you have the 7-Up commercial, which we were able to obtain from the Chicago Film Archives. That was on a reel that Morton had put together to showcase his body of work. Otherwise, I'm not sure we would have been able to find it. You have a bottle and a can from 2 different collections at the University of Illinois, Chicago. You have a magazine, the Idea magazine, showcasing more aspects of this campaign, as well as 2 different facsimiles of 2 of their projects for 7-Up, a billboard project at the far left, and then a kind of light experiment with light on the far right. And then in this image, you have, again, you can see the logos juxtaposed with, in the back room, this is one of the Kleenex experiments from the same reel that you saw earlier in this presentation.
There were several cases with books or publications or examples of their design work. There were a lot of publications that came out of the new Bauhaus projects, a publisher in Chicago, Paul Theobald Press. Morton did a number of designs for their publications.
And, you know, throughout we tried to juxtapose, as I mentioned, their film work with some of their other work, but we're also really interested in juxtaposing more experimental work, or the work that the firm did for just to experiment, see where things went, with their commercial applications. So here you see 2 facsimiles of 2 of the harmonograms. So we took the original slides, we blew them up and put them in light boxes to really relay how Morton had originally displayed them on small light boxes, but large so that more people could see them. They're juxtaposed with the television commercials, which were displayed on CRT television monitors. Again, really because we wanted to show the way that they had been intended to be seen originally, or how they had been kind of built to be seen.
So the last space you would walk through when you exit the exhibition featured these lens distortion films that Morton had created, and these were never actually kind of exhibited or presented in a public situation, but we had to think a little bit about how to present them or display them. And in this case, we worked with artist Jan Tichy, who was a colleague of Amy's at the School of the Art Institute, to think about a dynamic and kinetic way to display these works. And we had this room size kind of projection of 2 films that kind of spoke to each other spatially and visually. And here, the last clip, just so you can see the kind of movement and dynamism of the space as you're walking through. So this project was never actually realized by Morton Goldsholl, but for us it became a moment to kind of pay tribute to him in a way that we thought, having researched his work and spoken with his colleagues and family, that he thought he would have wanted to see these works. So, and it really gives you a sense too of, even though the technology was analog, not cutting edge, that it really had kind of a freshness and relevancy to it 50, 60 years later.
That's it. We'd like to open it up to questions. I think Mark will be moderating. We're happy to answer any questions from the attendees.
Great. Yeah, this is Mark from ACRL and Choice, and I see we've got a question or 2 in the queue already. I would encourage those of you out there listening in, if you have questions for Corinne or Amy, drop them into the Q&A box. Let's see, we have a question here that says, what should librarians and archivists keep in mind when working with art museum curators? Can you speak to that, Amy or Corinne?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, I think we came to some of the archivists with unusual requests, thinking about ways to display these works, or I think, you know, typically when people are using an archive, they're just kind of mining it for the material or the information, but we actually wanted to take the objects and then either reproduce them in the exhibition or display the actual objects. So, you know, I think just, you know, being open to the different kinds of display and thinking about, different ways of disseminating information other than, what's typical is kind of, part of an essay or part of a book or research that appears as text. This is just a very different kind of way of disseminating that information.
Excellent. And anything you would add there, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is exactly some of the issues that we came across. I also think that, I mean, as I had mentioned throughout the presentation, being open to establishing a kind of rapport with researchers is really helpful, because that it can be a two-way street. It's not just the curators mining all this material from the collection, but oftentimes curators, because they're invested in their particular subject matter, are also interested in returning some of that information or helping in other ways with special collections projects. So for example, with the Chicago Film Archives, we helped significantly with their cataloging over the course of this project. And I think that we were really open to that because it really helped to strengthen our overall exhibition and also the collection. So we were able to help future researchers, which of course were the aims of the exhibition, in any kind of future projects related to the Goldsholls.
Okay. We have a question here from Caroline, who asks, did you go into planning this exhibition knowing that you wanted to primarily use archival material? And how has that process been different than using traditional museum objects?
Well, I guess one thing that we were aware of or was very much on our radar, because of Amy's work primarily, is the Chicago Film Archives. So I think we did not know what we would encounter pretty much other than the film archive material. And I think there were even moments in our planning where we were thinking about the development of the checklist, and there were reassuring ourselves that at least we have the film. So that was, we knew that was going to be a very important part of the project. And then when we started to get into the archives, there were, of course, all these wonderful finds like the slides or the 7-Up bottles. So
in terms of the difference between a museum and special collections, is there a difference that you've encountered? How is it different working with the archive versus?
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, again, the archives are not as used to lending, but well, I think the question was, what did we know it would only be made of archives when we first started the project? And I think that really kind of came as a revelation later. So, we just didn't know what we would find. We ended up, there were some things that were in the Goldsholl archive that we didn't share, that were artworks that Morton and Millie made when they were students at the School of Design. But yeah, those were still out of the archive.
Great. And anything to add there, Amy, or do you think that sums it up? Or
I think, the only thing I would add is that registrars and museums are as invested in the object safety as everyone else. So that's the other thing for many special collections and archives to also understand, is that the museum is just as invested in the longevity of those objects as the archive itself.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Before we get to one last question, I'll just take a second to remind those folks on the line that we do have a link there in the chat box to a post-webinar survey. If you could, before you take off for the rest of the day, take a minute to let us know how we did in that survey. We'd really appreciate it. And I just want to get to this last question here from Robert, who says, first off, thank you for the presentation. And then as a librarian and artist, I really enjoyed the advertising and the light work stuff. And Robert's just curious about how much fun was it to find some of these lost treasures?
I mean, I think when we found, for example, the harmonograms at the University of Illinois, Chicago, those slides were so incredibly beautiful. And just initially when we found them, they were super mysterious. The same thing when we found the light slides of the Goldsholl family. I think both of those objects really took our breath away. They're incredibly beautiful to see, and just incredible to contemplate their production, the time it took to make them, and also the kind of the thought process behind them.
No, it was such a treat, first of all, to discover objects, but then also through the process, to get to know Morton and Millie, and just learn about their story and how touching it was that they worked together for their whole lives. So it was just an incredibly fun project.
Excellent. Yeah, and the presentation, even, you know, through the webinar, seeing some of these objects really is just fascinating. And as you said, there's a lot of really beautiful stuff there. So I will say thank you, Amy, and thank you, Corinne. As you've probably guessed, this is Mark from ACRL in Choice. I just wanted to say again, thank you for spending some time with us today and for showing us this exhibition and these wonderful objects. I just remind folks out there that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for that follow-up email from ACRL in Choice with a link to the recording. And also, as mentioned, you should see a brief 6-question survey, a link to it there. Please do take a second to give us some responses. We use them to try to make the program even better. So thanks again to everyone out there for listening in today and for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope the rest of your day is great. Bye-bye.